Good evening. We are so excited to join you live tonight for this fantastic conversation and to celebrate my favorite time of year, Black History Month. We have an amazing conversation lined up tonight with some fantastic women, and I'm so excited for us to be involved in this conversation. And before we dive into sharing their bios with you, I'm going to give you just a few seconds to go ahead and share this live, tag your friends, bring them into the conversation. You're going to see us get quiet for just a minute while we go ahead and share the conversation to our pages and allow you time to just bring folks on in. We have a great conversation lined up tonight, and we want to make sure that you have time to call in everybody that you think needs to hear this conversation. So, I'm going to give you about 1 minute to call your friends, call your mom and them, call your auntie, call everyone for this fantastic conversation. Let's see. All right, so we're not going to waste any more time. I'm going to start first by introducing to you this fantastic panel of women that I'm so blessed to have for tonight's conversation. I mean, they bring so much wisdom and passion to the table. I'm getting chills already just thinking about it because I know there's going to be a wealth of wisdom shared tonight. So the first person we're going to introduce is Miss Alexandra Clark. Miss Alexandra Clark, licensed specialist in school psychology. Ms. Clark has a bachelor's degree from Southern University. She has a master's in school psychology from ULM. She is currently attending Southern University, where she is working on her doctorate in public policy. She is a strong advocate for justice for and among the Black community and for anyone that she feels has not received equal treatment and fair opportunities. So we want to thank Ms. Alexandra. One thing I've enjoyed about her is on social media, she's very active in the news, very engaged in the news, and she shares a very open perspective on her position on justice. So she does some amazing work. Our second guest is Dr. Pamela Salisbury. Dr. Pamela Salisbury received her bachelor's in social work from Colorado State. She got her master's from the University of Denver and her PhD from Jackson State University in Jackson, Mississippi. She is a licensed clinical social worker and a board approved, and certified as a school social worker, among many other titles that Dr. Salisbury holds. And if you've been in this discussion before, you've seen us talk about many of the hats that she wears. She is really an advocate for the community, the state of Louisiana, and truthfully, the world. She is presently the executive director for the Office of Diversity at the University of Louisiana at Monroe. So we're so excited to have Dr. Salisbury in for these conversations again. Every time Dr. Salisbury and I start talking, what's supposed to be 5 minutes, it just goes on and on because there's so much passion, especially when we talk about Black community and empowering and working with our children and supporting each other. And so I always crave to hear more of her wisdom and the light that she brings to the table. And our second guest, and I'm going to say co-organizer, because she was actually the lady that said, I said, I'm thinking about doing this conversation. And she said, do it and please contact me. And that was all she had to say. And so I'm so excited for us to finally be able to have a conversation together because Tammy has a very strong perspective on things. And sometimes we are at opposite ends of the table, but we are always together in what our mission is, which is to love and empower others. And so I'm so excited for us to be able to do this today for the first time. And I hope it's not the last time because Tammy has an amazing voice that needs to be heard. So Dr. Tammy Sam earned her bachelor's degree from LSU and Southern University. She then completed her master's degree in marriage and family therapy and received her doctorate in psychology from Auburn University. She has facilitated group therapy focused on queer identities such as Rainbow Room, LGB support group, Sister Circle, group therapy for women of color, and transformations, part of the psychoeducational and part of the part process group therapy for persons of fluid or transitional in their gender identities. She is currently director of the Forensic Treatment Mall at ELMHS and oversees provision of psychological treatment services across two campuses, as well as the chair of Zero Suicide Committee. And outside of this role, she also provides telepsychological services with Doctor on Demand. So we have just a wealth of expertise in this room today. And I'm so excited for us to talk about our topic, which is how the trauma, and it's such a long topic, so pardon me for making sure, because I don't want to miss one error in this. So even though I wrote it out, I want to make sure to get it out there correctly. How the trauma of slavery, Reconstruction, the Jim Crow era, and the current racial climate has impacted the community. And the reason I wanted to make sure that title is specific is because when we talk about racial matters, quite often people want to chunk it up to two things: civil rights movement or what's going on right now. And they leave out all the other parts of history that have affected where we are today. So I wanted to make that title very clear so that we start to ingrain into people's heads the fact that racial trauma goes far beyond the Jim Crow / civil rights movement and beyond what we are experiencing right now. So we have questions that we will use to guide us, but our comment section is open. Our comment section is open, and we welcome you all to ask questions, to also share your opinions, and to engage. Please don't forget to hit the share button or tag people to come into this conversation. So I want to start with our first question, which is, what is your opinion about race and racial trauma from slavery until now? So basically, how do you feel we have evolved? What do you feel? What progress do you feel we lack? I'm sorry. So I'm gonna open up the mic, and I'll let Dr. Salisbury talk first.
Well, we have definitely, if you're talking about we as Black people, or we as society, or we as Black people in the American environment, we definitely have progressed. But one thing about the progress is that if you are, say, 4 steps behind and you progress, but you're still 4 steps behind, then you are progressing, but you're still behind. And we're behind. And I like to emphasize, not due to anything that we have not done, but because of the structure of the society. You mentioned the eras that we are covering. I think sometimes we forget about the we mentioned Jim Crow's mentioned, civil rights that's mentioned, but we fail to mention sometimes about the Black Code era where basically, like with sharecropping, but the Black Code era, we were basically, even though the emancipation had taken place, we were still enslaved. And so there is we progressed, we made progress, but at the cost of a lot. We unfortunately have not been able to experience just being people in American society. And that's a simplistic way of stating it for right now, but that's something that we have not been able to ever experience. And it was by design, not because of anything that we did not do. So therefore, we're fatigued. We've been, and that's a generational fatigue. I'm fatigued because my mama was fatigued in fighting this. My daddy was fatigued. My mother was born actually and raised in Denver, Colorado. And I say that because at the time, my mother being 96, a lot of Black people were not there. There were more than people thought. But my mother's family migrated from Louisiana. My paternal side of the family, it was in Oklahoma. And my father told us about the Tulsa, riots, a lot of things that we just didn't receive that information in our classes. And so when I had an understanding, I think, of our historical perspective that maybe some people did not. I say maybe, I don't know. I didn't discuss it with them, so I don't know. And my mother being an avid reader and appreciating people like Paul Laurence Dunbar and Langston Hughes and whatever, then we got that. But again, the fatigue, and there's a book by, what is her name? Mary Frances Winters, that's entitled Black Fatigue. And she talks basically about that, about the fatigue. It's not just the fatigue that I feel having dealt with these issues for, my lifetime, but the fatigue that that we've inherited from the generation before us that dealt with these issues. The generation before us, 400 years of being fatigued, fighting many times. Think about it. How many marches have we had? How many years have we been marching or protesting and et cetera? And unfortunately, and I'll be quiet and let the other young lady speak, for the same issues. So that's fatiguing. So we're just, as Fannie Lou Hamer said, we're sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Alexandria, we'll go ahead and let you speak as well. How do you feel about the progress or lack thereof from the slavery days till now?
Well, just to piggyback on Dr. Salisbury, like she said, we're tired. Like I always say, I find it very discouraging, very annoying that we are fighting the same fight as our parents, grandparents, great grandparents. Like my parents were born in the 50s. So it's a whole generation. So my parents grew up where they still had segregation, and then where there was integration and all of that. So this is the same fight my parents have fought for the last 50, 60 something years of their lives. And, it's kind of like people try to dismiss everything. Like you say, they want to bring up slavery and then bring up, well, nobody alive owned slaves. It's not about us being owned. It's about the reputation that we have. We as Black people, no matter how good most of us do, they still want to reduce us to animals. They think we're less intelligent. And that's by far not the issue. One issue, maybe like a few days ago, I was reading an article about a Black family who had their house appraised, and that house was appraised for $500,000 less than what it's worth. And then they turned around and let a white friend act like she was the homeowner, and they got that extra $500,000. So that's how they were able to compare that. And the same thing happened last year. So that's just the ones that we know about. So think about all of the houses that we tried to sell, and they lowball us like that. And everybody knows, if they lowball the price of your house, then you don't get to sell it for as much, and you don't get as much profit. And so the cycle just keeps continuing, because we all know having real estate, having property is a form of wealth. And that's a form of wealth that they have always tried to deny us. If you look back in the 20s and 30s, the federal government gave land grants, but one of the restrictions was, we gonna give you this land, you can build this community of houses, but you cannot and will not, and you better not let a Black person or a Black family own anything on this lot. And then you go to the redlining, because then once you redline and you go for a loan, most of the banks wouldn't give you money for houses in the red areas, and the red areas were the Black areas, which they also call the hoods and the ghettos. So it's just, it happens over and over and over and over, and we try to fight it, but the institutions that keep us bound have been around longer than any of us have been alive. It stems from slavery, and it's just exhausting when people keep saying, oh, if that's old news. Nobody, you don't have to be a physical slave for you to still be oppressed, for you to still be bound, for you to still be chained. And we can shout it from the rooftops, but the main people that don't want to listen are the main people that benefit. You know, they either benefit from it or they have been indoctrinated by their parents and grandparents to think that we are less than human. So they don't want to be shown the light. They don't want to understand that, you know, these things are still happening to us. It's not us. Just like, in, you know, if you stay in certain areas, then of course, do the red line and all of that, the property taxes are lower. So then your school gets less money. So then year after year, these certain schools never get the equipment they need. They never get they don't keep the teachers they should. And it's just exhausting because it's so many areas in which we are still being treated as slaves. We are still treated and looked at as less than human. And we don't even know how to begin to change it, because we know it, but the other people that should know it, they don't want to know it, aka your non-Black people who benefit from it.
Thank you so much, Ms. Clark. I love it. I'm here for all of it. I'm ready. We're going to come on to Dr. Sam. Same question. How do you feel that, you know, how do you feel we've progressed since slavery until now? Where have we lacked? So.
Yeah, first of all, Jamie, just thank you for having all of us here tonight, and particularly thank you for myself. So just thinking about that question is interesting, and I know Jamie knows I do this all the time, so she'll forgive me. But the fact that the question is about how we have progressed and not what progress that our oppressors have made in itself is very, it still shows that we're still working on not believing their messages. You know, this is not about the progress that we as a community need to make. We did not put ourselves in these situations. We are not sustaining ourselves in these situations. We are being held into these positions and situations. And some of the things that Dr. Pamela brought up and Ms. Alexandra brought up demonstrate how, as a community, we have continued to voice and march and fight and bleed and die to prove that it's not us that needs to make progress. It is, in fact, our counterparts that do. And I think the thing it reminds me of, and the other people on the screen with me are clinicians, and so they will have heard of. There's a work. It's called DBT. It's dialectical behavior therapy. And one of the things that we talk about in that therapy is, although you may not have been the person that caused your problems, you are the person who is going to have to work on managing them. And for me, that's the way that I think about the condition of Black folks in this country is we are not the root of our problem, but we are the ones that are continuously and tirelessly trying to uplift and sustain our communities. And two of those things that I think just are, central reminders of all of that we've come through and that trauma and what's also sustaining it. You know, the first one of which I see as the judicial system, and the second one I see as economics. And so if I were to define slavery, to me, it is about being imprisoned without with no access. And so financially, if we consider all of us on the screen as Black women, we make 68 cents to what a white man makes in the same role, everything else. However, as a gender racial group in this country, we are the most educated. We're the most degree holding group, gender and race wise. So how is it that the most degree holding group, gender and race wise, is making 68 cents less than a white male group who does not hold the education that we hold and everything that you keep saying? And so whenever someone likes to use that phrase, well, my family pulled themselves up, and if you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and that's fine because y'all had boots, but y'all had us without shoes. So nobody got straps, nobody got boots, none of that. And we've been able to walk that same path as you walk without boots, without shoes, without straps. And yet, when we get to the end of the finish line, somehow you're in first place. And on the other side of that, when I think of, particularly for what I do as someone in forensic psych, the judicial system, unfortunately, it's the first time that I'm seeing a lot of folks, they've come in contact with being arrested or something like that. And that's the first time that they're learning about medications. That's the first time that they're learning that they need other types of assistance. And it's because of the lack of access. When I was in second grade, for example, and I don't even think Jamie would know this story, but I was put into special education because they said that I was a behavioral problem and that I was a special needs child. Now, my white appearing grandmother went to the school to question this and was told that if she disagreed, she had 30 days and the school system would have to test me. And they did, thinking that her grandchild probably did not look like me. And what they found out is that in second grade, I was performing at an 8th grade math level and a 10th grade reading level. So I was then put into the gifted program. But which my parents were both working, things like that, didn't know to challenge the system, didn't know what that meant, all those kind of things, would I be Dr. Sam today? Would I have earned a doctorate at 25 if I had been put into a special education class where you were telling me that I was somehow a behavioral problem and not performing and doing all these other things? And so, those two things, lack of access, and not because we don't want it or we haven't asked, but because the rules are always different for us. And, finances, and being always considered on the wrong end of things. So why is it that as a young kid in the classroom, I can't behave, but my white counterparts are managing ADHD, or they just are spirited, right? So just the way that those things happen, I think it greatly changes the path for a lot of Black kids who become Black adults. And as Dr. Pamela said, that they're tired and they're very much so disenfranchised by the community. And, like Alexandra said, they're looking to parents or they're looking to family to go, hey, I need some help. This is hard and struggling, but they carrying 400 years on their back too. And so everybody is tired.
I love it. I want to thank you guys for giving such well-developed answers, of course. And I want to clarify that when I asked the question, I'm speaking of the United States as a country. Because what you all do know is that I don't believe we created most of our problems. But I still believe that what Dr. Sam says holds much value, because there are a lot of people who believe that when we say the term we speak of Black people individually in a situation where we, for the most part, have not had control over anything regarding us for hundreds of years. And even in today's situation, we can seize more opportunities, but there are still so many systems in place that are designed to hinder our progress. Just as Black people have always chosen to do, we supersede anyway. So, I wanted to make sure to clarify in that point, while emphasizing that what she expressed is extremely important for us to understand. So great. Okay, so let's go to the next question. And I'm going to share something. Can we please limit our responses to about 2 minutes a piece, because I have a lot of questions. And we have a lot to talk about. And I want to make sure that you all get the chance to really dig into things you want. And if you go over a little bit, that's cool. But I just want to emphasize that. My next question. During the Reconstruction era, there were a lot of opportunities that were open for Black men. We won't say women, because we know women still had really no rights. However, one thing we know is that also once they realized how much black men were doing by just being given a chance, all of a sudden the Reconstruction era came to an end, and I think it lasted something like 12 or 14 years. So it wasn't nearly enough time for us to be able to really gain pace the way we wanted to, despite the fact that we had Black communities going, we were building cities, we were getting educations, we were mastering a language that was not our original language, and we were taking doctor this, attorney that. You had Black folks becoming attorneys without even being able to get a quote unquote formalized education, but they were making a lot of political moves. As we know, this resulted in Black politicians being killed, Black people being harassed and threatened. This led to a lot of massacres around the country, and hence the Black codes came into place. And but it was the beginning of the Jim Crow era. My question for you is, how do you think what happened during the Reconstruction era impacted the Black community in terms of where we are emotionally and financially? I'm sorry, Dr. Salisbury, I'm coming. Okay, there you are.
Well, I think succinctly, and unfortunately, we see this a lot. That progress, like you said, there was tremendous progress made by a people that was literally, obviously owned, and I believe that's something that people tend to not really understand what that meant and means. There are other individuals. The comment that was made about bootstraps by Dr. Sam. She's exactly right. We were the only group of people in the United States. The only. I don't care what anybody else's problems were. I don't care what. When I say I don't care, I'm not minimizing it. I'm saying that with all the problems of discrimination that other groups have experienced, Native Americans, Latinx, etc., nobody was owned. Nobody was owned. Nobody was deemed inhuman or 3/5 of a person. Nobody but Black people. So you have to come from that perspective. This was a group of people who were considered to be non-people. Okay, that meant they had no rights. What did the Dred Scott case say? They had no rights to be respected. If you have no rights, even when you make progress, someone can come along and take it away from you. You can't go to court. You can't call the police. You can't whatever, because you have no rights. And unfortunately, that is kind of like a anvil, a dark cloud that is hung over. No matter what we did, and we can make progress, it can be taken away. Even when we were told that you need to be self-sufficient, when we became self-sufficient, we don't want you to be self-sufficient because that means if you create your own store, then I'm losing money because you create your own store. And then to me, it seems like, and my parents, when you start to feel yourself too strong, then we have to bring you back. When you start thinking of yourself as a human being with all the inherent rights, God-given rights of being human, then we have to bring you back. And that's something that I believe that our children and our children's children, that this is not something that Black people did to themselves, created themselves. This is something they have absolutely no control over, as far as when you have no rights, when you can't go to court, when you can't, you have no rights, then anything can happen to you. And it has. And then that is something that we need to consider, the impact of still existing, still achieving, still doing those things, knowing that, as you pointed out, Ms. Mays, that 12 years or so, that was all taken away and it's flattened again. So now you got to start all over again. And as you said, housing, land, you could have those things. And unfortunately, we probably all have stories where someone in our family can tell us how they were cheated out of land, or they were cheated out of this. And again, when you have no rights, you can't go to the courts. You can't do those kinds of things. And the impact of that, psychologically, emotionally, economically, is profound and far-reaching.
Dr. Salisbury, I want to follow up just by saying, when you made mention of the attitude of, who do you think they are, and then they have to try to pull you back from that, we quite often don't really realize how even our everyday conversations and a lot of the sayings we have come from traumatic slave experiences. And one of the things that I actually don't allow people to say to my son is, who do you think you are? Or you think you're this and you think you're that. And for a lot of people, they may say, "Oh, well, that's just petty." But I never, not even to my students was it allowed to be used, because it triggers me in a different way. It makes me think about how when slave masters, as I've learned more, would tell them you're an uppity N, or you think you're something, don't you? It was very demeaning because it meant that you thought too much of yourself. And so, how many times do we hear other people say those types of things to their kids when they have exceptional personality traits or skills or whatever? They don't, because they have not been conditioned or degraded for long periods of time to use that type of language. In some cases, you do if it's an abusive family, but just for everyday practices, we don't. And so, what I try to get into the habit of, and try to get into the habit of with both my students as well as my son, is affirming their identity and breaking that chain, because it's not about who you think you are. I don't want to even begin to create self doubt, because this country does enough to create that mindset. So, you just made me think about that. That's one of those things that seems small, but to me creates such a big impact. And I've even had people say to my son, well, he's just so confident. And I say, well, why shouldn't he be? All of our children should know self love. All of our children should know confidence. All of us as adults should know confidence. And quite often, the reason that we second guess ourselves is because there is trauma that is linked all the way back to things that were put in our minds when we were much younger. So, Dr. Sam, I saw you getting ready to speak. And we'll come back to you, Dr. Salisbury, if that's okay.
Yeah. When she was speaking, one of the things that, came to mind, I guess, Jamie, this is to your point, was I think, unfortunately, what Black folks unfortunately got from the Reconstruction period was, if we really shine and do a lot, it will be taken from us. And it's unfortunate, because what it then means is that we're not really able to bask and sit in any of the, to go back to the first question, the progress or the achievements or things that we do in this country. When we think about people being on jobs or things like that. And I think, slavery, Reconstruction, all of those things really taught us that there's only so much room for us. So we shouldn't demand to have 100% of management look like us. Like, if we get one of us up in there, then, hey, we doing good. Like, no, like, this person's more qualified than that person. So because there's already, quote, a Black one, we need another, because we need this competent person. And I think, unfortunately, that was one of the things that slavery really taught us was, if you try to leave or do this, that's why it was so important that they had other Africans sitting there to be the ones to ring the bell to say that you were leaving or things like that, to create that competition and that animosity between us. And then when Reconstruction happens, and then we start to go, wow, look at all the things we can do, and then it's taken away. I think from there, it creates this mental lesson of, you can only do so much, and your light can only shine so much, because if it shines a little too bright, it will be taken from you. And so as I think about the assassination of, something so inhumane, if we think about Medgar Evers, he was shot and killed and murdered in front of his children. So if someone can have that level of hate and capacity over you, that they not only are so willing to take your life for the achievements that you're doing, but they also send a generational reminder through your line of, this is not what y'all get to do in, quote, my country. And I think that's the lesson that Black folks got from that this is not our country. One of the things that it's resulted in, there was a long time in my history where I referred to myself as an American citizen. And the reason for that was because I didn't see myself as, although native born, there was definitely a sense of, this isn't my country, because it does not make sense, if this was the place that I was born and reared and everything else, that I'm somehow less than other people. And so when I think about what Dr. Pamela was talking about, particularly with Reconstruction, there are all these mental lessons that I think have happened. We talk about the crab in a barrel mentality and things like that. And, I don't get mad when people say, like, oh, well, they don't treat other Black people like this. And no, they were taught that. So rather than being mad at the Black person next to me that is somehow thinking that there are too many of them, I'm gonna have compassion for you because you were taught by your oppressors that only so many of us need to have this access and this power and everything else. So I'm not gonna get mad at you, boo. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna have compassion for you that you somehow believe that and drank that. And then I'm gonna be reminded that the folks who taught you that are the ones that I need to educate, not you.
Very true. That's so true, Dr. Sam. That when we meet people like that, right, and then it goes back into that threat mindset. They really bought into the idea that if there are too many Black people who are successful, then my position is threatened. And it is very unfortunate when people have that mindset because they have unfortunately felt they had to buy into that in order to be successful. So what you say is very, very true. Dr. Salisbury, I'm sorry, let us go to you and follow
Well,
up.
but no, I'm not going to make a long. But I was just a Manning, and right now I guess I forgot exactly what specific point I was going to make at that time. But I was. I think it was this weekend. I'm thinking that I was looking at Birmingham and remembering the 4 little girls that were killed there,
Yes.
and I was looking at a survivor, and she said that after that happened, and goes to Dr. Sam's point, as comfortable as she was as a Black child in Birmingham, and that could be at that time, her mom or daddy or brothers or sisters, whatever, and they were doing the quote unquote normal kinds of everyday, like they were in church. They were in church that okay. And also they pointed out that wasn't that bomb killed people, but as Dr. Sam pointed out, when people began to make progress or began to do too much, they would bomb something. They would throw a bomb on the car or whatever, but nobody had died until that, and they killed those 4 babies. Okay, but she said that after that happened, it dawned on her that as strong as she saw her father as being, as strong as she saw her brothers and stuff as being, that nobody could protect her. That even with that, now daddy, brothers, whatever, they could protect me so far, but my shoot, they and guess think of how many times we get that message that, gee, no matter what I do, and as you pointed out so nicely, Dr. Sam, it can all, I gotta feel shaky about it because it can go away at any time. And something else is that you're right about that socialization, because we know that only one person, many for years, could be they're going to have this one person, and we can get into gender as well, but this one person. So if they're only going to hire one, then you wanted to be that one, and then you quote unquote knew that, shoot, somebody else is going to threaten my oneness here, whatever, and that can make it seem as though people therefore are fighting against each other, and I love what you said about that attitude. Well, I'm not going to fight anybody. Because I know where this comes from, and that's not where I am. And I love to be that person who says when people. And I keep in mind that we've all been socialized in the same milieu. We've all been socialized in America. I mean, they didn't say, okay, we're going to, and I mean, overall, it's up to us, as you point out, Dr. Sam, to socialize each other and say, well, yeah, that's what they're going to say out there, but that's not the truth. And I want to make that specific point because of this, that crab in a barrel mentality. Oh, well, you know how, and I used to hear that so much. And I remember really wondering why many times we will be repeating that about ourselves or whatever, that crab in the barrel, because I remember hearing a monologue of Dick Gregory, and he addressed that question. He said, when you put crabs in an unnatural situation, when you put them in a barrel, they're not supposed to be in a barrel anyway. So they're going to do some things that in trying to get out of that barrel. And what might look to you like they're fighting against each other, maybe they're helping each other by, instead of saying, oh, well, that one crab got all the way up to the top and then fell back down because the other crabs were pulling on him. No, it's the ladder that each crab created for the other crab to climb on their shoulders and climb up and climb up and climb up. And maybe if you get to the top, you can pull the rest of us out. And they fall back because they're not supposed to be in that barrel instead of fighting. And so what looked like they're fighting each other, it looks like they're trying to find a way to help each other out of this unnatural situation. And I think about the things that we have done for survival. And granted, and that's something else we need to realize. There's no perfect ethnic group that, oh, they get along, everybody in the ethnic group gets along, whatever. We hear a lot, oh, black people can. Well, and I asked the question then, well, what ethnic group gets along with everybody? I mean, when everybody in the ethnic group gets along, I mean, what is it that, and many times we're caught up on to be perfect. We can't do this, or we can't, well, what ethnic group gets along, And then I had to resolve to the point and try to, well, you know what, whether people are acting this way or that way, or we might not all act the same, but we've all been in the same situation. So we've all experienced, and all black people are never going to be the same. You're going to have the rich and the poor and the ghetto and the non-ghetto and the do whatever, but we all deserve to be without discrimination. I don't care what, we all so, and there's just so much more. But I'm hold up. And one more thing. I remember people saying, "Oh, I'm not going to use the term." Well, perhaps it's a terminology that won't be offensive, but I think the term is it nigger rig or something like this when they say people this. And so somebody said that, oh, they did that and they put this together. And I said, did it work? They said, yeah. I said, well, then that's ingenuity. That's not, why do you want to put a negative slant on something like that? Because I remember my father used to fix stuff or whatever, and if a part was left over, he said, well, I guess they didn't need that anyway because it's working. And so that's when you can use your ingenuity, which we have used to survive. You use what you're given to progress yourself. And we need to look at the beauty of what we have been able to do, which means survive in a land that just said that you didn't have any rights. So I think it's perspective. That's like this Silas said, perspective. It is about perspective,
What you said is so spot on, Dr. Salisbury. And one of the comments said it's all about perspective. And when you talked about the crabs in the barrel, I was one of those people that felt kind of worn down, like, why do we have to use that one again? But in bringing it up, there are two things. Number one, the idea of having empathy and compassion, as Tammy talked about, for people who have this mindset or who feel as if it's a competitive realm. And the other part is perspective on everything. You're absolutely right, because we have seen, one thing we've seen for sure is crabs link up and pull not just one out of the hot crawfish ball. We see them, they have one linked on that they're trying to come out of, that they're trying to bring out with them as well. So, I love that. And I'm going to bring the next question to Alexandra, but I want to share something with you guys that my mother, who is tuned in, shared today. And my mama tends to remember a lot of things that I blocked out, and really traumatic experiences. I grew up in a majority white community where I was very much so ostracized. And if you guys recall, I recently wrote a poem called I Smell White Privilege, where I actually talk about what that experience was like. And so I'm going to go ahead and share this. She says, Dr. Sam, you're on point. One of the things Jamie dealt with in school was authorities who felt intimidated by her because they felt she was doing too much. She always came up with great ideas to benefit the students, whether they were black or white, and they didn't like it coming from a strong black student. She was constantly harassed by authorities because of it. I was, and my mama had to go to the school a few times. I had teachers that were very open about saying they just didn't like me. But it was because, and I wasn't the type that tried to morph into a different character to fit what everybody else thought. I was just myself. And it was very problematic. I blocked a lot of that trauma out because my mom can verify it became so stressful for me that I actually lost my hair. It fell out. By the time I got to my 11th grade year, I was like bald completely in the back because I just couldn't understand. And we raise our kids to have this kumbaya attitude, to love and treat everybody well. In particular, the Black community is raised to be forgiving and to be supportive. But when it is not reciprocated, it is really a hard pill for us to swallow, because we can't understand why people will not treat us the way that we treat them. So you guys share some important things today. Mom brought up an important point. She got me a little bit emotional, tingly over here. because it was a very, very, earth-shattering experience. But we're going to talk more about our children in a minute, because we've got to acknowledge how the past has affected opportunities for our children right now. But one of the things I wanted to bring forward, and I'll start with Alexandra, is if you guys watched last week, they had a two-part series on the Black church on PBS, and it was really good. And even if you didn't get the chance to see it, you can still, I think, understand this question. My question is, how has the Black church helped and hurt the Black community when as we work through the movement of making progress? So how do you think the Black church has been helpful? In what ways do you think the Black church may have not been helpful? And when I talk about this, I'm not just talking about collectively, I mean individually as well, from a humanistic standpoint. A lot of times we look at it in terms of Black community wise, and that's excellent, but we also need to look at what our Black church has done from a humanistic point, and how that humanistic aspect has affected us culturally, because it started off as being the base of great things. So Alexandra, I'm going to go ahead and listen.
Okay. Ooh, that's kind of a touchy subject. I would definitely say the church has helped the Black community just throughout the generations. It gives people hope. When you see, especially, I can only imagine, during civil rights, you might get beat up as soon as you walk down the street. You walk into the store, they might call the cops and put the hoses on you and things like that. So I think the Black church helped it being a refuge, and your Black preachers giving you encouragement. And even today, my preacher, he's spoken on race relations several times, and it's always uplifting. And it's just like, you got to keep pushing forward. You got to keep your head up. So in those aspects, it gives us hope. Now, negatively, I can't really say too much about it being negative. Okay, I'm gonna put it like this and try to keep us from getting kicked off of Facebook. Okay, we'll be honest. Most of the time, we met up at the churches, to start the protest and organize and things like that. But I think by now in 2021, we all know that marching and holding hands and turning the other cheek has not gotten us where we want to be. So, but you can't blame the church, because the church can't, teach what's in the Bible, but then turn around and tell you, hey, we meeting in the back at midnight. We about to get this and this and this, and we gonna handle this ourselves. The church cannot tell you that. So I wouldn't say negative. It's the church's hand is tied, like I can't preach you Jesus and love and forgiveness and love and forgive your neighbor on Sunday morning, but then Sunday night we plotting to go Rambo style. And that's all I'm gonna say about that.
I always love the versatility of Alex, because she looks at it from every aspect. How do we handle this? If option A does not work, then do we need to choose option B? Does anybody else have anything to say about how the Black church has helped and hurt us through this movement era? Dr. Salisbury. Can you unmute yourself, Dr. Salisbury?
Are you? Yes, I'm sorry. I thought that was control. But I looked at that series, and I think it was quite educational, informative, but not just about church,
Yeah.
Black community, but about the history of individuals. Because
Yeah.
even with church being the first place that we had control over, quote unquote, somewhat control, and as you saw that series, when they thought you were being taught too much, then they come in and they disrupt the church because they didn't want you to do that. But from my experience and from looking at that, the church has been a place for release, because you could go emotionally and you could be yourself. Okay. But it has also been a place for restraint, because again, as was pointed out, they, just by being a religion, and obviously, there are different religions. I guess it couldn't what teach you to maybe to go kill somebody, do whatever, if that's what if you're going to be a follower of Jesus. But it did teach you how you could change let me put it this way. It did teach you perseverance, and that something can happen to it. If people didn't believe and crucify Jesus Christ, then you could probably guess your life might have some obstacles in it, but you have to keep persevering and going on. So I think the church was the first place where Black people could gain some independence. There's also for learning lessons of restraint, so that you could still kind of be around, and fight battles in a way that you could be around. But it definitely was an organizational opportunity, etc. So for restraint and release, because I remember one of the statements that was made, and that was true. Well, my mother used to tell me that she liked to go to church to get filled up so she could persevere for the next 6 days, so she could come back and get filled up again. So release and restraint. I think that's what came to mind for me when you talked about the church.
I still agree with your mother to this day, because for me, I feel that when I go on Sunday, it's my carrier through. And if I can get there on Wednesday, I'll really be strong throughout the week. By Friday, I'm burning on a little fumes, and I'm glad the weekend is there. I always admired the role the Black church played in helping to move forward Black folks, whether it was keeping you encouraged through slavery, the beginning of individualism during Reconstruction, the construction of a real action plan during civil rights, or the evolution of personal growth where we are now. It's always had a significant role. But I will say that what bothered me as the Black church continued to evolve was that in many cases people became so hooked on the religiosity of church that they started to, in a sense, make people feel like outcasts if they would not conform to what the religious practice was of that church instead of the relationship. And I felt that in some cases we have had potentially great leaders feel that they were pushed out because the atmosphere shifted to being one where we were looking at practices a lot more than we were looking at relationship and potential and growth. And so culturally, that's one of the things I've seen in a lot of churches is churches getting back to that attitude of let us cultivate positivity and love and give people support so that we are able to help you see your full potential. But I think there's a lot of growth that we have to do to get back to those days where the mission of the church through Christ was much bigger than what our religious practices were. And so I was just thinking about that. I want to share a comment as well from Dr. Denise Higgins. She says, the trauma that is passed on from generation to generation caused African Americans to struggle to see the good in ourselves. African Americans have adopted the very things that were frowned upon by our ancestors. For instance, the equivalence of intelligence as an inherited white trait. However, if you're behaving negatively, they call it quote unquote acting Black. I think that part kind of goes more into what modern people have adopted. When we talk about what happened with our ancestors, in many cases, they were more afraid of you showcasing it, not necessarily afraid of you having it. Because unfortunately, intelligence could get you killed by your slave master. Remember, we couldn't read. We were not allowed by law to read. We were not allowed to get an education. When we were allowed to finally, quote unquote, get an education and read, we had to build our own establishments. So there were so many limits set. And I think that what she says, though, about how we have become conditioned to apply those negative traits to ourselves every day is absolutely true. Making statements like, negative behavior or, being outlandish in a certain way, people saying things like acting Black, or even the term acting ghetto, or even being called in television terms, acting like a thug, are all negative terminology that we have associated with ourselves because we've been conditioned that way over time. And I just really thought that that was a great statement as well. So let's fast forward to education. Um, and I'm gonna start with we're gonna start with Dr. Sam, and I'm gonna throw this one over to Dr. Clark because he's actually a school psychologist as well. My first question is about education, and we have heard so much. There have been many articles shared recently about how schools have let people opt out of Black History Month. How many schools do not Oh, we have a great question coming from TikTok that I will definitely address in just one moment. Yes, we're going to talk about that as well. And so, my question to you all is, how do you feel, or do you think that K 12 education puts enough intentional focus on Black history? And if they do not, why do you think they don't do it? Okay. Do you believe that K through 12 education puts enough intentional focus on Black history? And if they do not, why do you think they don't do it? I'm going to start with Dr. Sam, and then we'll go over to, I was about to say Dr. Clark.
So I guess you sort of posed something first about people opting out. So I'll answer first of all, do I think they should have the choice to opt out? This may sound controversial, but yes, I do think it should be a choice. Here's why I say that. People need to decide if they are going to, what our practice has been, try to contain all of Black history into 28 days in the school systems, or you're going to teach it for the 9 months. Those are your options. So when I say they get to opt out of teaching it in Black History Month, I'm saying because you then need to teach it year round. I actually had this conversation with my husband last week, and it's one of those things that I said to him. He put his headphones on and he was still driving, and he was like, I'm going to start using that. I was talking to him about I am going to be more intentional about acknowledging first in everything. And by saying that, so when we say Barack Obama was the first Black president, then I'm going to acknowledge that George Washington was the first white president. And I think that that's important because inherently what it teaches us and our kids is, that this is just a white thing until one of us of elite status was able to break through. No. You had a first, we got a first, everybody gonna have a first. So this happens to be ours and that happens to be yours. Now, unfortunately, for a lot of white people, their first will be the first period. But I think it's important for us to, think about things that way. Kamala Harris is the first Black vice president female, and John Adams was the first white man. That's the way that I'm going to talk about that. And so one of the things that you are asking, Jamie, I think it is not done intentionally. And I'm going to take a little bit of heat off of the teachers here because I feel like we come for them a lot. And I know that's not what you're doing because I know you. But how do we expect these teachers to teach something that they are not expected to learn when they are becoming K through 12 educators? They are not expected to learn this. They are not taught to diversify books in their classrooms. They are not taught to diversify examples. Even something that we put money and think tanks into, such as for instance, the SAT had to change a question maybe a decade or so ago because no matter if someone made a low score or a very high score on the SAT, they noticed that students of South American descent were all getting this one question wrong. And the question is one of those, this is to this as that is to that. So, the question would read something like, water is, or it would have been like blue is to water as green is to what? And the answer would have been grass, right? But they were all marking bananas. And why? Because in America, we eat our bananas when they're yellow. They don't eat yellow bananas. They picking them when they're green. So even things like that. So I think if we're not having our teachers engaging in these conversations when they're getting their degree, if we're not teaching them how to, have books in their classrooms when they're teaching children how to read. I remember as a kid, we all saw Tom jump and we all saw Jane run, and they didn't look like you. So if the books had curly haired girls who were talking about different things, or they were sitting on stoops in Baltimore, or it would diversify that. But that is not what those teachers are being taught in when they're being taught to become teachers. And I think we need to be more critical of the books that we're agreeing to. Years ago, a great faction of people got together and really fought against the Texas high school books, which literally stated that slavery was akin to having an unpaid internship. So folks who were in slavery, it was like being at an unpaid internship where they weren't paid, but they were taught skills. I'm going to go on a limb and say wasn't no Black person at that table when they wrote that part of the book. So, things like that. I think that is what lack of access and equity does around those tables when you don't have those faces, and those faces that feel like they can say something and speak up, because it's not just about a face. They got to be somebody that understands our culture and what we're talking about. But then also, let's be honest, we're not teaching teachers how to have these conversations and how to be inclusive in their classrooms in terms of their content and all those kind of things. And everybody had the alphabets across the board, on top of the board. And there weren't pictures of brown kids on those alphabets and things like that. So why are we expecting them to do something that we never expected of them, taught them, or prepared them for? So I'm not giving the teachers a pass, but I'm also saying we need to be realistic that we didn't have that expectation for them when they became teachers.
Well, and what you say is so true. I'm gonna start by saying a couple of things, because Dr. Salisbury and I will end up chiming in on this, because we've actually been on a roller coaster ride locally, haven't we, Dr. Salisbury, about this very situation, and it ended up with me being in a very heated situation not too long ago. She's laughing, and I will tell you this. First of all, the problem is that a lot of school districts do not have a desire to really come in and talk about equity and equality within their school systems. You have many professional development. There are several of us who have launched a mission. If you follow a woman named Solandra Geis, who is actually one of my editing clients, who is working on her second book about diversity and inclusion. We have pushed books that talk about diversity and inclusion. But I can tell you straight up, there is not one professional development in my 13 years as a teacher that I attended that was specifically about diversity and inclusion. And I was in the classroom 13 years. As a matter of fact, I would teach lessons and I would actually bring in and extend. It could be a tiny poem about Nikki Giovanni out of the whole section. One tiny poem about Nikki Giovanni. But today in Ms. Mays' room, we're going to do a whole lesson, and you're going to learn about Nikki Giovanni's life, and you're about to see a Nikki Giovanni book, and I'm about to give you a Nikki Giovanni video. And during Black History Month in particular, I actually taught everything from the slave trade to the present, while making sure I stuck to and included my curriculum. Was it a lot of work for me? Yes, it was. Was it very hard? Yes, it was. However, at the end of the day, my responsibility was not even, and I didn't teach all Black students every year. I had schools where I worked at schools that were Black and white as well, and they all had the same experience. Because at the end of the day, if we continue to make kids feel like they only learn from people who look like them, we're not doing our job in actually exposing them to this wide world. And so we also have to get school districts to start, and this comes with a big push from people who believe in making this text inclusive. I'll be honest with you, my son's current school curriculum, I actually reached out to them and told them that the curriculum was not diverse enough, and that you're an online school and you are employed through an HBCU, yet your curriculum is not diverse and it does not speak to kids who look like mine. Something different has to happen. And so these districts throughout the country, and America has to first acknowledge Black history with open arms. The reason it tends to be limited to Black History Month is because Black folks unfortunately think that that's the only time we can raise real sand and get some buy-in to let us do it at least for Black History Month. So we're requesting just a minimum amount, but we've requested the minimum for far too long. And we need to step into our rights to be royal and received and respected and start asking for the most. Because we give the most with every single job we've had, with every single role we play. We've done what we had to do to reach higher levels. So ooh, honey, you woke up my teacher spirit with that, because that was a spot on comment. It's spot on. Nothing mentions Black history or Black culture or diversity when you're teaching them. Teaching teachers how to be teachers. As a matter of fact, they rarely even partner a Black teacher and white teacher together to learn and work from each other, and that's problematic. So what you say is great, y'all. We have some great feedback coming in from TikTok as well. Before I get to Ms. Clark, I'm gonna say a few things from TikTok. So Sabs 7401 says there are Black educators who cannot teach our children our history because they don't know it either, and that's very much true. If I learn it and I don't even know where to go to get the truth. And I think that we're in an era now where it is available more often, but it's not preached in our school system. And so this is very true. This is a very, very true statement that we have true folks that look just like us who also don't have any information about Black history and Black culture. So there's a teaching that has to go on across the board. So I'm going to go ahead and go over to Dr. Clark. I'm going to call you Dr. Clark tonight. Everybody's doctor, because you're on your way anyway. You're in school. Dr. Clark is going to share with us as well. And she has worked in schools. As a matter of fact, her most recent school was actually one where it was a predominantly white school. And there was a different experience for her. And even if she doesn't speak directly to that, just what experience.
Well, like you say, the K through 12. Okay, I also worked in another predominantly white school district maybe about 7-8 years ago now. So as a school psychologist, my job is to conduct special education evaluations. So when this thing is in the way, Dr. Sam was telling me about her experience, I was like, we're talking about her experience and then wanting to put her in special ed. I was like, oh my God. But so one day I was doing an observation in a classroom as part of an evaluation. So I was observing a certain student, and it happened to be maybe had to be a Friday. And the teacher was like, okay, kids, pack up, I'll see you guys Tuesday because Monday is a holiday. And of course, most of the kids in the class are Caucasian. So this little Caucasian boy was like, oh, why aren't we coming to school Monday? She was like, it's Martin Luther King Day. I'm thinking, maybe he's, how the days just kind of go and you not thinking. So she was like, Monday is Martin Luther King Day. And he was like, who is that? I could have just died. I could have just found his parents and shook them like, and he had to be probably like in second or third grade. So for you to not even know the name of Martin Luther King, like Martin Luther King Jr. is the person that white people throw out whenever they try to tell us that our protests are too this, too that, too violent. Oh, don't take a knee, don't do this. Well, why can't you be like Martin Luther King Jr.? White people bring up Martin Luther King Jr. every time, every chance they get. But this white child didn't even recognize the name. So I was just flabbergasted. So clearly it's not taught. And even when I was in school, I'm 34. So even when I was in elementary school and middle and high school, Black history was only for that 1 month. And it's like, if we're in science class and we're talking about chemistry and this, the beaker and the this and the that and the third, the burner, I know for sure a Black person invented some part of some of that. The teacher should expound on that, or your textbook should expound on that. That's the other problem. So I find that teachers are made to teach to the test, standardized test. Most teachers, that's all they're worried about, whether that's right or wrong, indifferent. Maybe they're overwhelmed themselves. But when you're told that if your students don't make this type of progress on this test from last year to next year, whatever, you're not going to get a bonus. You're going to be deemed as ineffective. It doesn't really leave most of them much room to try to integrate anything, because it's like, oh, no, I got to stick to this. I got to stick to this. I got to go to this. I got to go to this. Like teaching is so compartmentalized and so standardized now that I can see why some teachers aren't like you, Jamie. I can see why some of them don't do it. They should, but a lot of them, they just holding on by a thread. They flying by the seat of their pants. Half the time, they don't get proper training. Like you say, the professional development is really just now. It's just a reason to make y'all come to school a day or two ahead of the kids. Like most of the time, the PD is not very informative. It's not transformative. It doesn't give anything that's gonna make an average teacher better or anything else. They are taught to teach to the test. The kids gotta score this. The kids gotta score that. So we were already thrown to the wayside. Like I said, Black history itself is already thrown to the wayside with just being taught for a month. So now, with the standards being different for teachers now than when they were back then, it's going to be really hard for them to feel confident in introducing Black history into every day, every week, every month. But that also goes to administration. Administrators have to make teachers feel that it is okay to deviate or add to and expound upon. But let's be real, most administrators, they're not caring. They just, I need these results, and it is what it is.
What you said is so true, and it comes down to so much about test scores, and that's why it has to be integrated into the curriculum as a part of American history. So we go right back to the need for America to address not just Black history, but address the truth about it. We are still fighting to even be recognized for the true story about what happened to Black people. I've been sharing stories on social media throughout the month, and I share them all the time. Y'all know I'm always sharing and causing an uproar. But you will be amazed by the number of people who want to dispute what is actually a fact and what we know, and through logical conclusion you can conclude. And so, getting America to first acknowledge Black history, we're not even to be honest with you, there is not a request for you to dig deep into every single thing that happened. If you would at least talk about the major periods, that empowers kids to have a sense of identity and to have some goals to learn more. That's with everything that you do. But we can't even get a basic lesson that embodies and incorporates Black history into the curriculum. Somebody on TikTok said, how can we change what teachers are teaching our children? In order to change what teachers are teaching our children, it really goes through the heads of our school system. It has to be why our nation makes this a requirement, and they make Black history a normal thing to talk about and integrate. And they teach it not just as Black history, but as American history, because that's what it is. But the first goal has to get this country to truly acknowledge the experience of Black people in this country. How can parents help? Now, TikTok, y'all always starting something. We will dig deep into that on Monday, because that's when we talk about talking with your school boards, talking with their state boards of education, even starting up petitions that make your voices heard. Because if I'm not mistaken, last year there was a district in Texas, I thought it was San Antonio or Austin, that actually made Black history a part of the curriculum. I'm going to look that up, but that's only one. And here we are, we can't do it in others. But we will talk more about that, because that'll take us to a whole different place. But there are ways that parents can get on board for it, because let me tell you one thing. The teacher has no power without the support of parents, especially when it comes to talking about Black history and Black culture and for integration of learning for all kids who are in need. I'm going to hop on over to Dr. Salisbury for a minute so she can really talk about her beliefs in equity and equality and self-efficacy. Because what I asked was, how do you think adding Black history into our curriculum can affect our kids? So Dr. Salisbury, I'm throwing that mic to you.
Oh, wow. I had so many things I wanted to say about so many things that were said. Let me try to gather myself so I can make sense of what I say. Exactly. One thing about teaching the history, as you pointed out, of America, that this is what this is. This is a history of America. And I was looking at a statement that was made about comparing Malcolm X's approach to dealing with the inequities in society and MLK's approach. And then the statement was, and they both were killed, that Malcolm X used force. Malcolm X didn't use any force. Malcolm X didn't hit anybody. He didn't kill anybody. He didn't fight anybody. He had an articulation, an oratory that told the truth, and it was powerful. And because he said that if you hit me, I'm going to hit you back. Basically, they thought he was violent, and unfortunately, that's the kind of misinformation that even we have about ourselves. Malcolm X didn't use any force, if they mean that by hitting somebody or fighting or doing whatever. He just had a forceful intellect that said what he was going to state or not. But one thing we have to be cognizant of, and I love what Dr. Sam said about, I don't want anybody be forced to teach my children are out of that level of school now, and I have grandchildren, and especially if they don't believe in what they're teaching, because that's not going to be a good lesson. And you're exactly, but unfortunately, the most important fact about that, as far as people doing it in school now, I definitely think that parents, and when I say that, I do understand that we don't. All of us don't have the knowledge because we didn't have access to the knowledge that we have access to now. But I can remember just the oral tradition in the Black community where we tell about our own family. That's history. We don't have to remember that about Dred Scott and whatever. We just need to tell them about what we did, what your grandmother or your aunt or your granddaddy or whatever, that or history, because I guarantee you that you're going to learn about Frederick Douglass somewhere along the line, because you're going to be connected to that. But and the important thing about that, and which we definitely have to address, and I wish I had the answer, as Ms. Mays pointed out, we got to get on some curriculum committees. And state curriculum committees, because those are where the decisions about the books are made. And as you point out, Dr. Sam, we got to have some eyes on there that say, wait a minute, this is not American history, because you've left too many people out. And it's all connected, because some things about, there won't be, I've never taken a standardized test that asked me about any person in history that was brown, yellow, red, whatever. And that's what we must do. And I definitely think that if we had a true understanding of history of America, then we would have a true understanding of the history of America and why we are where we are right now, period. And this is all people. Why Native Americans are on reservations and when they own the home. Why are these people living in there? Why is this going on? We need to have that. But unfortunately, the whole thing needs to be attacked. And parents, that makes us. And I'm going to conflate, to use some intersectionality here. It's the same thing with females. We have to have a whole history of what human beings have done, and when we dichotomize Black history over here, Women's History Month, we're going to have but then if February is Black History Month, March is Women's History Month, and my son asked me about that. Well, if all this stuff is true when he was a little boy, why isn't this in the history books? And that goes to your self-efficacy. And so I had to answer that question and tell him, yes, this is true, because he was questioning me, because and that was what I mean by parents' responsibility. I tried every report, every lesson, everything that my children had to do when they were going through. I tried to incorporate. They could find somebody Black. I don't care what it was science. They could find somebody Black to make that report on. If it was English, they could find somebody Black to. And so that became my duty. And then my son asked me that, and so I had to tell him why we weren't in the history books, at least the way I saw that. So he would not feel he was not capable, because you can have a high sense of self-esteem, and it's structured that way. We see a lot of athletes, don't we? We see a lot of, but we don't see those people that make, all behind the scenes that make things go. But if you don't think of yourself as capable outside of the athletic realm or the music realm or well, then you don't try those other things. And this is why it's so very important that our children see that we do absolute and have done absolutely everything. Cooking, cleaning, going, when I first heard about hidden figures, I'm talking about, whoa, well, wait a minute. What is this thing about? We got to get more Black people and kids into STEM. Wait a minute. What you talking? Well, wait a minute, Charles Stewart. What is this? If you know the history of Africa, there was a Timbuktu. There was a whole lot of math and English and science and whatever going on over there. So it is of paramount importance. But as Dr. Sam pointed out, you have to be taught by somebody who knows himself and who believes themselves. And so we definitely have to look at these curriculum committees. I was at a meeting, a school board meeting not too long ago, and the term came up, background knowledge. I said, and this person didn't have a background knowledge. So I'm sitting at the meeting, and so when they had question and answer time that we were allowed to ask at this meeting, I raised my hand. And so I want to know, define for me background knowledge. So the definition was given to me. We're talking about culturally relevant knowledge, because I want to know, and what I mean by that is, we can't, if the student doesn't have the background knowledge for this lesson, they're going to be left behind. And we're talking about people in first and second grade. What do you mean background? How do you know what? Well, where do you say? How do you ascertain what a child is supposed to come to what background knowledge? To me, that means what kind of life did they have? We're talking again about culturally biased kinds of experience, because the example I was given, well, if we're talking about some lesson that has a Statue of Liberty in it, and the child doesn't have any frame of reference for the Statue of Liberty, and I'm thinking, if I was, and I wonder, did I have any frame of reference for the Statue of Liberty when I was in the first grade or second grade? Probably because that wasn't in my, experience. However, if I had an aunt that used to travel to New York, and if I had to travel to New York with her, then I might have had a frame of reference. So again, that's culturally biased there, and we're starting our children off. So we have to have people all over. And unfortunately, that it again go back to being exhausted, because we have to be ever vigilant. We have to always be on point. If we are going to protect our children's sense of self, we have to do that consistently. And self-efficacy is hard to achieve if you don't see examples of what you're capable of doing in all aspects, not just in one or two areas. And so I could go on and on, but I'm not going to do that, because we're going to have another opportunity. I know.
Look, because the fact of the matter is, representation is good, but if we're not providing kids with resources and ideas to which connect, we are not giving them as many opportunities as we can. And that is why it's so important in education to make sure that we are a physical point of reference, but then they don't have learning material that is a point of reference and growth as well. And so on TikTok, they say here, they can't teach us what we need to know. We need to figure out a way to teach us what we need to know. But understanding the fact that America knows what to teach you, it is having a desire to actually teach you that, and no longer feeling threatened that if these people learn how to read, they'll read everything. If these people learn how to get access, even let's talk about now, if they get access to all the resources we put out, if we actually give them the tools to understand how to use these resources in the applicable way, if we stop putting in new guidelines and new criteria for everything that we put in as a law or an opportunity, then they'll get these opportunities and they'll supersede. So the same thing applies to education. If they start making you feel as if you're an integral part of the history, then you gain a sense of identity. And in my opinion, nothing gives a person more purpose than identity. It is my belief that a person who does not know their identity cannot begin to understand their purpose or even the capacity of their purpose. And so it is so important that we really discuss, because in addition to that, you guys made an important statement about educators who don't know themselves. This applies also to the mental well-being of everybody who is affected. This talks about the mental trauma, because there are a lot of people who say, I don't want to talk about it because it's too hard for me to discuss. I don't want to talk about it because, well, I've never had to learn about it before. So why wait till now? There are a lot of reasons people give. But when we talk about the mental trauma and unpacking the things, we don't understand cultural norms. We won't understand our own rearing practices. We won't understand what's a good practice and what's a bad practice, what's a chain we need to break, until we are able to go back in history and look at the path from which they come. And when you talked about fitting it into the context of American history, one of the things that I have talked about was Natchez, Mississippi, and the Devil's Punch Bowl. And a lot of people tried to say, well, how would you know it's true if it's not in history, if it's not in a standard American history book? But when I went back and looked at where America was at the time of the Devil's Punch Bowl, which was Mississippi in a drought, Mississippi had cut itself off from the Union and had nothing. When I looked at it in the context of American history, it's no denying it. So one reason is because if you look at Black history in the context of American history, it validates every single thing that we've heard, and there's no way that we can continue to downplay, hide, or disregard the experiences of Black people. And once you validate those things, now it becomes a time for accountability. And this country still does not want to have accountability for a lot of the situations that exist today. Oppressive systems, prison systems that are set up to systemically and disproportionately affect Black men and even Black women, educational systems that have been designed to limit educational opportunities and to put our kids on a prison pathway before they have the chance to even learn their own personal identity. And so that is traumatic behavior. It is very traumatic because a child who has already been identified as problematic in the second grade is then going to encounter nothing but person after person after person who inflicts trauma upon him or her because they have already been told that they are destined for a future of doom in this country. And that is specifically particular to the Black experience in this country. So we have a couple, y'all know that we're almost finished, but I want to touch on a few stats, okay? And I'm gonna let y'all talk about them. So I'm gonna touch on the stats and I'm gonna let you guys generally give your closing because it's 8:27. I don't want to keep y'all much longer. A couple of things I found in research. One thing says 8 out of 10 Black adults say that slavery still affects the Black community today. Only 1/3 or less, and to be specific, it was 33% of the Asian community. I think 27% of the 29% of the Hispanic community and 27% of the white community. Only that percentage of them agree that slavery still affects the Black community today. The other one was 4 out of 10 adults believe that the U.S. has not done enough to give Black people equal rights. And a large portion of the people in that 4 out of 10 were Black folks. So the number was like 8 out of 10 Black people, and it was like 4 out of 10 in other races. And that's what brought that average down. Okay. And 64% of the Black community does not have faith in a real progressive community. In light of the data and stats that I just gave you all, and when we talk about trauma of the Black community in America, what would you each say in closing? I'm going to go ahead and start with Dr. Clark, and then we'll go ahead and do Dr. Salisbury and then Dr. Sam. Dr. Clark, I'm going to unmute you. There you go.
I am not doctor yet, and I'm keep telling you that. So, in a nutshell, you know me personally, so I'm not surprised at the statistics. I'm not surprised that the rest of those ethnic groups don't think that slavery affects us. I mean, people don't have common sense and compassion, basically. And I'm just gonna be real about it. A lot of people, if it didn't happen to them or their people or their ancestors or whatever, they don't know and they don't care. And that's just the bottom line. So I'm not surprised that they don't think that slavery still affects us, because they're blind to systemic racism. They don't realize that the institutions and things that were established starting from slavery and Jim Crow, it's still active. Like, say, the judicial system, like all these Black people that are getting arrested, they're getting framed. Their jury is all white. You're supposed to have a jury of your peers. So unless I live in the middle of Boo-hoo, Idaho, why do I have an all white jury? Why are Black people not called for jury duty? Now, I know some Black people try to wiggle out of it, but I know a lot of Black people who vote and are not called for jury duty. I'm 34 years old. I was called for grand jury duty one time about 7 or 8 years ago. I went. They didn't even interview me. They had already picked their 12 people before they even got to me. Why have I only been called once? But yet you keep calling. Some people get called multiple times in a couple of years span. So they don't understand because they don't want to understand. The proof is out there. The statistics are out there. It's on Facebook. It's on Google. It's in the form of an article. It's in the form of a TikTok video. It's in the everything people have done to us. The government has done to us. You can watch anybody go watch Judas and the Black Messiah, even though I knew about stuff like that before. They made the movie Panther back in the 90s with Kadeem Hardison. That shows you how the government infiltrated the Black Panthers and try to make them seem like a terrorist group, which they're really not. I had a white coworker. We were at another coworker's wedding a few years ago, and that was the same year that Beyonce performed at the Super Bowl, and they had the black berets and stuff. And she made the comment, "Did y'all see the Super Bowl halftime show? I can't believe she came out there like a Black Panther," and went on. And it took everything in me not to backhand her at our coworker's wedding, because white people still have this idea that the KKK and Black Panthers are the same thing. No, they are not. The KKK killed people just because of the color of their skin. The KKK killed you because somebody lied and said you looked at a white woman. The KKK killed you because you wanted to go sign up so you could vote. You had the right, but they still tried to kill you for exercising that right. Black Panthers, however radical they were fighting for equality for us. They didn't go around just killing white folks. If you come for us, we gonna come for you. But if you stay out of my way, I'll stay out of yours. So basically, in a nutshell, I'm not surprised at these statistics, because in the grand scheme of things, nobody really cares about us but us and our allies. Of course, we do have allies, in different races, but it's not enough allies to bridge the gap with those numbers and the ignorance. So.
You say so many things that are so truthful about the perceptions of, and this is the thing, I'm gonna tell you something that more than one white person has told me about how people try to perceive the Black Panther Party and everything. There are a lot of people who know. There are more people who know and understand than don't know, but they seize the opportunity to use it at their convenience because they don't like the idea of that empowerment. The Black Panther Party was very dangerous not because of what they tried to coin them as. It's the same thing we see now with the Black Lives Matter movement. If we see a movement of unity and empowerment that makes people feel that they can in fact make something happen, then we must identify it as the enemy and dismantle it and make people feel as if it is a threat in order to take that power away, hush you, make you be quiet. And so what you said is so important, and which is why listening to these stats are so important about when people say, do I feel Black people deserve reparations? Does the Black community see a possibility of more progress in the future? What number of people who don't look like us actually feel that, Black people have been given justice? And I'll be honest with you, I was shocked that it was about 1/3 in many cases of people who even agreed with it, because sometimes the voice of this country is very bleak. And we have to question whether there are enough people who are willing to stand up and step forward and say, because it's not a one-man show. This is not something that can happen just on the backs of Black people. It is something that affects the Black community, but everybody has to care. Because unfortunately, we use our voices all day, but we've seen it every single time until people who don't look like us step forward. Unfortunately, in this country, there's no true rage. And that's what frustrates me, because in a sense, it takes me all the way back to the idea of being 3/5 a person. While I may not feel that way, it is how am I viewed by this country. And so we have to have other people on board with us to make that change happen. And look, I'm gonna tell you, this new group of young folks, I love the new 20-something-year-old folks, because they do not play games and they are not with it. But we have a responsibility to teach them what leadership looks like and to guide them in understanding a lot of things. So excellent job. I just wanted to share that. Dr. Sam, we're going to hop on over to, we're going to let you close since you're co-hosting with me. We're going to go over to Dr. Salisbury. Dr. Salisbury, what would you say about those numbers we just shared?
Well, it's not surprising that there would be more people who have a connection to the history of slavery and all the remnants, the Black backlash, as we went through the Jim Crow, the Black codes, et cetera, et cetera. Fast forward to this time, and they would know there's, like we said when we started, we're fighting some of the same battles. We were fighting some of the same battles we were fighting before. So that's not a surprise. And the smaller, much smaller number of people that did not have the same experience that we have had in this country, how would they know? We've already talked about how history is dichotomized, and it's like, here's the history, and here's this history over here, this history,
Right.
until American history is truly American history, then how do we expect people to know exactly what happened in America to all Americans? And so, you know, that's unfortunately where we are, and it's not just by happenstance, it's by design. If you have right now, I think there's a senator that made proposed a bill. I don't know if it's a federal or bill about the 1619 project. That's too harsh. We don't want people to know that you know that reality. So until we have true American history where everybody can see the truth about everything and accept the truth about everything that's happening, we're going to have people who still don't understand. They don't know. Well, it's you know, now everything is even and okay. Well, it's not, because if you start out behind and you don't ever be able to make headway and make up for lost opportunities, lost time, you know, discrimination, etc., it's going to be behind. So I believe that until we get to the point where we have American history taught the way that American history happened, we're going to have this issue. But I also don't think we should wait, because if we wait for that, you know, and like I said, we should become as much as, and we're moving in that direction. I like to listen not only to what's happening in the state where I'm in, but I like to listen to what's happening in the nation that I'm in. Yes. And we have, like you said, some people were saying, okay, we just have to build our own. And I think that's how we're going to have to address this, be as independent as we can be, because history will tell you that when we said we're going to do this ourselves, then we fare better. And unfortunately, history also tells us that can meet the fate that Rosewood and Tulsa and whatever met. However, we have banking opportunities, we have some opportunities that we need to take advantage of so that we can become more self-sufficient, more independent, and I think that will make the difference. But I'm not surprised by that, because the history is not taught the way the history should be taught. So people would not know all the atrocities and the thing. Like, I was looking at a news program where this guy told his father, do you know that after World War II, and my father was in World War II, and they had the GI Bill, whatever, there were a lot of these services that the black soldiers couldn't get. And so this was a community that no black person could buy into. And when you started building that, it intergenerate that wealth, because you got to have a house after with the GI Bill and etc. After that, and the guy that was hearing that was really pained, because he thought he was a good person, etc. And he said, no, I didn't know that, you know. And I'm sure there are a lot of people that truly think, well, whatever situation that black people are in, they're in it solely because what they did not do, instead of realizing what really has happened, that we were not allowed to do more than just not vote. We weren't allowed to do things. And still, we have houses.
Dr. Salisbury, I don't know. I thought maybe I shared this on here, but I did a video on TikTok about two things. One is a Amazon Prime documentary called The Ugly Truth, which is one of the most amazing documentaries I've ever seen. And the second thing is about the very thing you talked about. When the GI Bill was introduced in the early 60s, I think it was around 63 or 65, there were more than, I think, like 3,000 components of the GI Bill, and only about 3% of them actually applied to black soldiers. They talked about how in, I think it was New Jersey, there was 65,000 bills given for housing one year, and only 100 of them went to black soldiers. There were over 3,000 given in Mississippi. 3 of them were given to black soldiers. They did things like tell black folks, they would build this housing for soldiers. But white soldiers did not want to live in integrated housing, and by law, blacks and whites didn't even have to live in the same neighborhood. So they would tell black people, you have to find a house where you can live, but then they would redline black communities. And so you get sent back to the neighborhoods where you feel like you just left from. Just many things. They talked about how if they wanted to go to college, schools were segregated, so a white school could reject you. You go to apply at an HBCU, well, then they drag their feet about your admission and sending your military coverage over, so you basically miss the semester or you never get in school at all. And so all of these things through our history, I mean, system after oppressive system after oppressive system. If we talk about right now in this current era, I talk about this thing right here. For a long time, black people had no idea. Oh my gosh, one of the people we're talking about, is a veteran here, said they were denied their GI benefits after 17 years for the military. There we go, another example. And this is the second part, I think the third person from TikTok who has shared a story relating to them or their parents. These stories are very real. I even talked about how if you're familiar with filing bankruptcy, once the black community learned that if you file bankruptcy, you can go ahead and just get a fresh start on things. Then all of a sudden they introduced several different chapters of bankruptcy that basically define what type of bankruptcy you filed, so then people can judge you on the basis of the type of bankruptcy you had to file. So these systems still exist today, and they're still put in place time after time again to limit opportunities. So what you're saying is just so amazing. We're going to go over to Dr. Sam. Y'all, we'll be on this all night. I got to talk to my fam on TikTok because they have hopped in here and they lighten up conversation. I can't answer everything, so they're listening, and this is exciting. But I don't want, we could go all night, okay? Don't get 4 black women in the room to talk about some real things, because, honey, we've been studying and we've been praying for the children and the grandchildren and submitting our honor to the ancestors for all they've done. So we're here for it all day. But we're going to go ahead and talk to Dr. Sam and get your feedback as well on those stats and data that we shared earlier. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought she unmuted herself. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Repeating what's been said. Yeah, not surprised. I actually feel a little hopeful, thinking that it's a third of non-Black folks that feel or believe that slavery still affects the Black community. It's probably more than what I thought, but I'm also coming off of the last 4 to 10 years of rhetoric. But I would say this, there's a psychological principle about cognitive dissonance, and I think it's really important for this conversation. And cognitive dissonance is one of those things where if I believe something at my core, but an incident happens or information comes into my being, that then those two things no longer align and they don't make sense together. It then forces me to consider a change in my belief, a change in my behavior, or to disregard such information. And I think that this is central in, I see Ms. Clark shaking her head. So as a psychologist, I know this is central to this conversation because in particular, we are asking, if we ask, and I'm going to focus on white folks, if we are asking white folks to believe that slavery still affects the Black community today, then we are asking them to challenge the fact that their white supremacy, they're still benefiting from that. Because those two things can't live together. Black folks can't still be affected by slavery and white supremacy not be a thing. So if what I'm asking you to do is say that this still affects me, what people, and the conversation of, I never owned folks and things, I was never owned either. But there is information out there that still tells us why that affects us. So for instance, if a African person comes into this country today, their at-risk cortisol levels, so cortisol is our stress hormone, their stress hormone is similar to that of, more similar to that of someone of European descent than it is someone who's African American. They don't have the same stress hormone. Fast forward 3 generations in this country, Their stress hormones, their great grandchildren's stress hormones resemble that of my stress hormones, because they are now inundated into this system of African Americanness, which states you are not allowed this, you are no longer provided this. So it does not matter whether you can trace yourself back to being owned if in this country you are told you look enough like this that I don't need to afford you humanity. So one of the things that we have to consider is, it's basically a conversation of telling white folks, you need to make a choice. You need to make a choice that the comfort that you experience living with white supremacy is that more important than the pain and the trauma that you're inflicting on my oppressed Black child. And unfortunately, that statistic tells me that they agree that the comfort they experience from white supremacy means more to them than the health of my child. And I think unless other people, other groups are able to understand how the health and the well-being of Black folks in their lives is integral to their own health and well-being, then they will not be invested in our futures. And so that goes for us as well, because there's still 2 out of 10 that don't believe it still affects us, but we're gonna leave that group alone today. But thinking about that, we have to be invested in the overall health of people in this country. So if you're telling me that slavery does not affect Black people and they've told you it does, then you then have to be okay turning around and saying, I choose to neglect the health and well-being of Black people to preserve the comfort of the world I live in today. It is not I didn't know, and I don't do that, and I don't treat people. You have to decide which statement you're going to make. And so I think it is always a choice for other folks, and they need to be aware that when you answer questions such as this, you are choosing to say, I believe my Black brothers and sisters. I don't know how it is affecting them, but it obviously is. Or I'm choosing to tell them I know more about their experience than they do, which is a form of supremacy.
Ms. Mays, what? One more thing that Dr. Sam, yes, ma'am. You encapsulated it all, and you're exactly right. We don't have things like high blood pressure, obesity, because we are not eating right, doing whatever. It is because of the fight or flight sensor that we're always in, and we tend to always have to be fighting or surrender.
Always feeling that we're fighting. Yes. And let me tell you something. And that constant feeling of fighting and turmoil on the inside will manifest itself on the outside. So when you meet a person of color that seems to have a violent nature, a lot of it is connected to the turmoil that is inside. And we tend to judge people beforehand on things like that, but we've got to come to a better place. Especially, and I would say not solely as people of color, but especially as people of color, because it would give us a different understanding of each other. Some of us are able to control that turmoil in a different way, so it doesn't manifest in the same way. But for those who have not mastered that art yet, we must exhibit compassion and patience with each other, and most important, tolerance. I've told people all the time, as a girl who grew up in the housing projects, in poverty, single parent home, probably almost every statistic you could think of that society coined, there were a lot of ways that I could have fallen into the cracks of what was supposed to be set up for me. But I made a different decision because my mindset had evolved differently. Some of us get it now. For some people, it's the next generation. For the next folks, it's the generation after that. What we must exhibit with each other is patience in order to help each other grow, because you could very well be the person that helps that other person get to the level we need to be as people in order to continue to grow and evolve. We had another question in the comments about education. We're going to talk about that later on. We've talked about anxiety. We've talked about all kinds of things. And this has been such an emotional way to start the last week of Black History Month. I'm not about to start crying on y'all, because I will. But I had the vision for this conversation last year, but I was not as courageous as I am now. My health was still up and down, but this year I chose purpose over other problems. And I'm so happy. The numbers for our lives were great. We have had people tuning in from everywhere for this conversation. And not only was it needed for other people, I feel it was needed for us. And this is such a beautiful come together moment for women. And I thank you all for agreeing to this. And I hope that we'll be doing more conversations throughout the year. I want to close with a poem. Y'all know I love my poetry, okay? But I have a piece I wrote called I Smell White Privilege. And I feel that in light of what we have discussed tonight and the other things that we have addressed, we have to address how real it is that we have not been able to see the progress we'd like to see. And, I'm a very real person. And the more I've been able to be real about what we are experiencing, the easier it's been for me to try to figure out what can I do every day to be a better person to society and to the people who look like me to make this journey easier. And so this poem has been very emotional for me, but I hope y'all guys don't mind me sharing it to close out tonight. And it's called I Smell White Privilege, okay? I smell white privilege. And it doesn't smell like the pancakes Big Mama used to fry in bacon grease from that big can at the back of the stove. I smell white privilege. And it doesn't smell like the salve Mama used to slather on my chest before wrapping me in that heavy cotton blanket because I went outside in the night air after I took a bath. I smell white privilege. And it doesn't smell like azalea trees blooming pink flowers commingling with pollen, tickling my nose and waking up my allergies, but tucking just right behind my ear. It doesn't smell like echinacea tea with honey or feel like warmth sliding down my throat after into my chest after coming in from school on an icy January evening. White privilege smells like skin roasting and peeling back the ankles that connect to the legs that crawl up a torso to the neck that hangs from an oak tree whose limbs sag naturally from the weight of too many pulls on it. It smells like pus, yellow and rancid, leaking from the back of too many granddaddies who woke too late, picked too little, or just couldn't take it no more. White privilege smells like gunpowder, ricocheting from the back of another face down body because he had Skittles, because she was too aggressive, because it looked like a gun, because they were black. It smells like ink signing the contract of another woman hired to do twice the work for half the pay while having a higher degree. I smell white privilege, and it smells like death. Seeing it on the news, hearing about it on the phone, reading about it on the internet, watching the numbers ticking and talking, but still thinking you are invincible and it won't affect you. And other lives don't matter, but I thought all lives were supposed to matter. I smell white privilege. And it seems as if it's in the air, coming out of my system. Some say it's systemic. At the job before I apply, in the room before I walk in the court before I go to trial, decided before I contemplate my choices. Smells like old book pages with fairy tale fiction stories they call American history intertwined into public education to teach a Negro to remain docile. I smell white privilege. And it smells like the wet dog mess I went through when a white teacher said she didn't know why she didn't like me. She just didn't like me. And I knew what it was because I could see it in her eyes. I could understand by the way she dealt with me. I knew by the way she talked to me. I was too black. I was looking too black, acting too black, smelling too black, like black pride and black girl magic, like natural hair and Bantu knots, like pure cocoa butter and shea butter, like spaghetti and fried chicken, like Frankie Beverly and maize, like red Kool-Aid and 4 cups of sugar, like HBCUs and a BSU at a PWI, like Erica Baidu and India by Irie. Because black pride ain't allowed in a room with white privilege. Ain't no commingling, ain't no understanding, ain't no new fragrance or no watering these things down. I smell white privilege. And it's choking the life out of me, trying to force me out of the room, hoping that a strong gust of it will take me out. America says it wants to clear the atmosphere, air white privilege out, bring in a fresh new breeze. But how will America get rid of the smell when they are the ones who created the odor. I thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. And to everyone who has done anything to celebrate Black History Month, I salute you. The work to make this country more equal and equitable for mankind is not over, but we must continue to act as voices who want to be heard. We must advocate for each other. We must stand up for each other. We must love and empower each other. I thank all of the wonderful women who participated in this panel tonight. If you are interested in having them to be a part of any panel you're having, I'm pretty sure they're open to it. You can connect with them on Facebook. And I will also have them post any information they have on my page on social media. I thank you guys for this very fulfilling conversation tonight. I love you all so much and have a great day.